Okay, so where we left off at the end of the last module is that we had added this Add Edit Customer view and the navigation to it from the Customer List view. Now we're actually going to flesh this view out and put the data entry form together. And as a good starting point for putting together your data entry forms, you can leverage the Data Sources window in Visual Studio, which allows you to drag and drop into the designer to scaffold out your data views. So first up, we're going to get rid of this text block. And then we're going to drop into the designer here and bring up a window that is called the Data Sources window in Visual Studio. From that Data Sources window, we can add a new data source, either with the hyperlink or up in the left corner here. We'll pick an object data source, say Next, and then drill down to where our model object definition is. So I can click on Customer here and Finish, and you can see Customer's been added to the tree here. From here, I can then drop this down and choose from what's going to be generated, either generate a data grid to contain customers, a list view for customers, or a details view, which really means a data entry form. So we're going to select that. Then we can expand, and then you'll see it has mappings for each of the properties based on its type. Now we're not going to use all these properties for this data entry, so I can go and set some of them to none, trimming it down to just the fields that I want to generate input fields for. Once I've done that, I can grab the customer and drag it out onto the designer, onto my user control. And when I release, it's going to do a bunch of code generation for me. You can see it generated a label and a text box for each one of those fields. And if I really wanted to change what's generated, you can see I can choose what kind of control to scaffold for it. Now, if we go into the XAML, we can see that it wired up a number of things that we don't really want to be here in an MVVM application. First off, it wired up a loaded event handler and expects you to do the wiring from the code behind of your XAML. We don't do that in MVVM, so we'll get rid of that. And we'll get rid of the event handler that it put into our code behind. Next, you can see it defined a collection view source as a resource here, and it's using that to wire up the data binding. We're not going to use that either for this scenario. Now what we're left with is that it was setting the data context of this inner grid, the one that contains the input fields, to that customer view source. What we'll change that to is to just bind to a customer property that we're going to expose from our view model. That sets the data context just for the fields within this grid, which are the labels and text boxes, to a customer, so that it can bind directly to the individual properties on that customer. Now again, as you can see, the fields are not in the proper order here, so that's the last little bit of patch up we have to do. It puts them in their alphabetical order by property name. So we can just drop in here and move labels and text box as pairs to where we want them in the order. Now, of course, the order of declaration in XAML doesn't affect the presentation order in the grid. For that, we have to then go and edit the grid row that these controls are being placed in and put them in the order of 0, 1, 2, 3. Now we can see they're in a reasonable order. Now we could go ahead and run, go to Customers, add a customer, and see that data entry form, and likewise when we edit a customer. Now we just have to focus on the view model and the interactions within that view, which we'll start into in the next demo.